The only thing more dispiriting than opinion polls may be writing about how dispiriting, even corrupting, they are to our politics, but let's give it a go. Monday morning was a heart-sinking moment. Two front pages of daily newspapers, two opinion polls, multiple earnest columns interpreting what these single surveys of less than 2,000 people might mean. The Australian, with its Newspoll, trumpeted, Turnbull rating soars as voters back tax cuts. In Fairfax papers, an Ipsos poll came to the opposite conclusion, coalition on slide despite tax cuts. So the federal budget was received well, or it was received badly, or perhaps people were having a lend when questioned by a human on the telephone, or by a computer-generated robo-poll. The Newspoll builds momentum for the government, said the Australian, while Fairfax's findings dash coalition hopes for a budget bounce. Sign up to receive the latest Australian opinion pieces every weekday. The two-party preferred vote, the trend that matters, saw no change in the latest Newspoll from the previous one: 51 to Labour, 49 for the coalition. Over at Ipsos, there was a jump for Labour by 2 points in a month, to 54 to 46, a thumping lead. There are no doubt reasons for the discrepancies, with psephologist William Bowie pointing out that how pollsters ask about preferences can influence the result. But that can't account for all of it. Opinion polls close to election day have a good record for accuracy in Australia, mostly due to compulsory voting. But between elections, they are at best a rough-as-guts snapshot of how a government or opposition is tracking over time, or how grumpy people are, or whether a particular policy has public support. The approval of same-sex marriage was so high in every opinion poll that there was no arguing with it. There are too many examples of mid-tier slumps meaning little when it comes to election day to take our regular polls too seriously. But we do take them too seriously. So seriously that there is an argument that the mainstream march of Australian political coverage is dictated by opinion polls, a shorthand for the politics of politics: who's up, who's down, how something will play, the breathless interpretation of each one. You can blame politicians. You can blame journalists. You can blame the frenzied information age. You can despair at the erosion of civic trust and faith in institutions. All of us involved in the dance know in our hearts, it is hopeless, but our resolutions to do better are short-lived. There are many exceptions, those who look beyond polls to the substance of an issue and try to put their oar in, but the noise, the current of our politics, is about polls. The dominant mainstream political story, at least since Kevin Rudd's demise at the hands of Julia Gillard in 2010, has been about leadership, rumblings, speculation, scheming, and the reason is the heavy weight of opinion polls, deadly to a less cynical view of politics and policy. We do not need reminding that our prime ministers are disposable. We do not need the former New York Times Australian correspondent, Nick Bryant, to tell us that our politicians and journalists are uniquely obsessed with opinion polls. Polls dictate the day's political story, prompt instant analysis, and give context for the coverage of issues. The endless reporting of whether Turnbull will survive as leader goes back to his foolish and telling declaration that one reason he toppled Tony Abbott in 2015 was because the government had lost 30 Newspolls in a row. He sowed, so he reaped. Dumping a leader is being discussed again as Malcolm Turnbull crashes into his own Newspoll benchmark, wrote the ABC's Louise Yaxley last month. Fairfax's Peter Hartcher concluded that while nothing would happen on the 30-poll anniversary, it would signal open season on Turnbull. Quietly, the Liberals' expectation now is that Turnbull will not be leading them to the next election. There was even a Twitter hashtag. Each poll is over-interpreted, especially if the Australian, which again this week proclaimed that Turnbull had strengthened his position as the preferred Prime Minister, compared with Labour leader Bill Shorten. But preferred Prime Minister is an unreliable indicator of election outcomes. Polling analyst Kevin Bonham calls it a bugbear of Australian poll commentary, which would probably be more informed if such questions did not exist. Each poll is Groundhog Day. After last year's budget, the Australian's Dennis Shanahan declared that everyone was eager for the following week's Newspoll, because it will determine the future of Turnbull and Scott Morrison, the outcome and timing of the next election, as well as the tenure of Shorten as Labour leader. Really? According to Ipsos, Labour has a big lead. But according to Newspoll, the 51-49 split may be 32 losses in a row, but that's good news for the government, because it's the second poll where the result is this tight, although 1 point up or down is well within the margin of error. So there has to be another story. What could it be? Of course, Shorten's leadership. Shorten has headaches, the bungling of his MP's dual citizen status among them. His leadership was questioned before the Batman by-election in March, but Labour won that. But what about these polls? The Australian's commentator, Peter Van Onselen, was quick to see the angle. This Newspoll, after months of consecutive fails, just might see Labour turn on its leader and descend into internal divisions of its own. How exciting. But who wins here? Are voters interested in this? Our love affair with opinion polls is only one reason our politics is so dispiriting, but it's a crucial one. What's sad is that we know it, but find it impossible to rise above. So, as meaningless as it is, I predict that if the polls dip, Shorten is gone before Christmas. If polling stays bad for the government, Turnbull's history. If polls change, I'll change my mind, so you'll never prove me wrong. Alcorn is a Guardian Australia columnist.